Okay, so we just used Illustrator to turn our output from the freewarevector.com, which was this, which was a JPEG, which means if I zoomed in on it, I would see the pixels, right? To this, which is not something I can open in preview, but is a vector that's a lot cleaner than this. Right? So these test transition files, the SVG and the EPS, I'm going to just put my name on them. And I mark them as gray because these are the really helpful files. But they do not allow us to print, and they don't allow us to put it to canvas. Instead, these are the files that can give us the file at any resolution we want. So what do? I have to use either Photoshop or Photop. I haven't tried this. Let me try Photop in Safari. See if it works. Nope, unresponsive. Okay. I like to use freeware where I can. So I'm going to use Photoshop, just for lack of better options. I don't need Illustrator anymore. I can quit that. And what I am not going to do is this. I am not going to take my EPS file. EPS is what works best with Photoshop. SVG is what works best with Photop, though they're both transferable vector formats. So if I right-click on my EPS and I say open with Photoshop, watch what happens. It immediately tells me I need to rasterize it. I just worked really hard to make it a vector file I could save that's not rasterized, right? That's not locked into pixels. So don't do that. Instead, do it like we've done with compositing. Make a new file within Photoshop or Photop and set that file to be the size you want to print. This same Photoshop file or Photop file, the same PSD file, is going to have both your black and color versions of assignment 4. What size should it be? It should be in inches. Because when we print, we need a physical dimension, a physical format. That's going to be 8 inches by 10 inches. And what resolution should it be? It should be 300 pixels per inch. That is our standard minimum for printing. Remember, our vector can become any resolution we want. Then we say create. I get a black 8 by 10 by 300. If you want to check it, you go to image size. And isn't it comforting to be back in a raster program? So 8 by 10 by 300. Great. Now we take advantage of that vector. And we grab that EPS, which doesn't even have a preview image, and we drag and drop it on. And notice what will happen. It will fill the whole thing from very edge to very edge, which wouldn't look very good, right? So what I want you to think about is this black space here, that is your black mat. So you are going to shrink your image or size it. I like to use option, right? So that it looks good on the 8 by 10 paper with the black mat around it. So you decide how big or small it should be. You can also decide whether it's horizontally formatted or vertically formatted, right? So whether it's 10 by 8 or 8 by 10. Mine looks better. It's taller than it is wide. Looks better on 8 by 10. I like it at this size. So then I hit return. Because I dragged and dropped the EPS in, it stays a vector file. You remember? It's got that little smart object tag, which protects it. It means I can't delete it. I can't edit it. I could warp it, but why would I want to? So I don't want to rasterize it. So that is safe and protected. So I'm going to mark that with green. I don't mess with that. This is now my finished black project, but this is not a usual printout. This is a logo or a graphic symbol. It has to be versatile, right? So how do we make it versatile? we put it on 3 different backgrounds. So I take my white background and I hit Command J, and then I go to Edit Fill, and I'm going to put it to middle gray. So now I can see how it looks on a gray background and a white background. And then I'm going to do Command J, and then I'm going to fill it on a black background. Edit Fill. And you can even kind of see it on the black background. Can you guys kind of see it? I actually have designed a few black on black t-shirts. They're kind of fun. But why are they different? Well, because when you run black out of Illustrator as a vector, it saves it in print colors, which is CMYK. But Photoshop runs, and PhotoP runs on RGB color, which is computer screen color. So the RGB black is blacker than the CMYK black. We'll learn more about that later. But this doesn't seem very versatile, right? So what's the obvious answer? Well, if you make a duplicate of your logo and then you rasterize it so you can change it, and then you go to Image and Adjustment and you invert it, that's usually how you would print your logo on black. But how can we make it even more versatile without having to rasterize it? We can double click on the vector layer, the smart object, and we can give it what's called an offset, a stroke that is white, pure white, and we can decide the size on the outside. Or we can say on the inside, or we could say at the center, whatever we think looks best, right? And we can decide on the thickness of that stroke. That stroke is the same kind of stroke that your vectors had as properties that we turned off, right? This is so we can control it all in one place. So this now becomes my black logo. And I'm going to do it with no background. And save it first as a PSD file. Just save it to the desktop for now. And then to put it to Canvas, save it as a copy or export it in PhotoP as a PNG. Why a PNG? Because we're not filling a rectangle. We want it to be a free-floating image. So what does that PNG look like? Where is it? Oh, it's on the desktop. Let me move them into my folder. They're here. So I've got my PSD, I'm going to mark that green, and my PNG, which goes to Canvas, it's going to look like that. Does that make sense? So this is still a black shaped logo, but it's a black shaped logo with a white offset. You will not lose points if you don't add the white offset, but it does need to be a black PNG of your logo at 8 by 10 by 300 pixels per inch. Yeah. Yes. Now the way I did that is the same way you can play with color. So it's done with what are called layer styles, which are attributes to the layer, but do not affect the layer. So they can be turned on and off. So what I'll do is turn them off here and then make a duplicate, Command J, of my smart object. So I brought it in, I sized it to look good. Let's just keep it on a white background. In order to make it maximally versatile, even though it's just a black shaped logo, I tried it on gray. It looks pretty good on gray, right? But when I try it on black, it's no longer visible. So I double click on the layer itself to open the layer styles. It's the same way we added color variations, flat 2.0 variations in exercise 2. And we're not going to do anything complicated. We're just going to add a stroke. Click on the stroke to get the stroke options, change its color to solid white. And then use these settings, the size and the center, inside or outside, to set the stroke. The reason it's not showing up is because I have the eyeball turned off. So that stroke's too thick, but with any layer style, you can just click it and reset it. So if I wanted to put up a design for a t-shirt, right, that could work on any color t-shirt, even black t-shirts, and it was a really simple black design, I'd want that white offset around it. So it will always show up. Okay, next, I'm going to make a duplicate of it. That PNG I'm going to put to canvas. We're almost done here. So I open up the assignment, and now, at long last, I can add my second requirement. Requirement 1 is the refined black shape sketch. Requirement 2 is your PNG, so your black shape vector saved as a PNG file at 8 inches by 10 inches, and it can be 10 inches by 8 inches at 300 ppi. Because there's no way to turn in your EPS or your SVG in a way that would show up online. Those are vector formats, not online formats, but you need them to be able to control this, right? To get this perfectly clean. And then I shrink it down. And PNG is different than a JPEG, right? A JPEG would have a white background. This doesn't. This is just free floating. Okay, next, make a duplicate of it. I'm going to turn it to a gray background because I think a gray background is the best thing to design color on. And now I'm going to try color variations on my logo. And so how am I going to do that? The exact same way. I'm going to click on the effects, and now instead of just stroke, I can play with all of these. So the easiest is color overlay, and I can just replace the black color with a different color. And if I set it to dissolve, which is what I often use for vectors, I can give it this kind of almost construction paper texture, which is very pleasing. Right? Or I can just set it to normal and have it blend that red in at 100% on the black or at a lower opacity. So that's just a solid color way of coloring with layer styles. That works. But if I open up the effects, I can play with more. So for instance, if I don't do color overlay, I can do a gradient instead. This is the last gradient I used. I can play with the scale of it. This is pretty nice. This is a radial gradient. It's kind of like a golden serpent. So maybe I like that. I can choose different gradients in both Photopea and in Photoshop. Play with them in different ways. I can even just customize them, make them my own by adding my own colors on the gradient, putting it where I want, how I want. And really the best way is to just play with these. And if I didn't want it to be radial, right, I can set that here where it's linear. And then I can play with the scale and the angle. Of course, angle doesn't matter if you're doing a radial gradient because the angle is always the same for a circle. And I can reverse it. So all these different options, right? But often less is more with color versions. I'm reminded of Mac when Mac had like the rainbow apple, but then they took it back to just a chrome apple. So I'm going to go back to just basic gradients. And maybe do that, but do it with a color overlay on top of it, and then just take the opacity down on the color overlay so the gradient comes through. So I just have a black to white gradient, but maybe I want that kind of gold color. So I put a yellow as an overlay on top at just a low opacity. And then if I wanted to have some of that texture, I can set it to dissolve. Other effects I can do. So that looks good on gray. Does it look good on black? Yeah, and that stroke really helps, the white stroke. Does it look good on white? It looks okay. How can it look better on white? What if I add not just a stroke, but a drop shadow?